Maybe you've seen a headline, maybe your city canceled a program or started asking questions about pride. Maybe you've heard someone say, I guess local governments can't do that anymore. Well, if you're like a lot of people we've talked to over the last few months, you're probably wondering, what does Florida's new anti-diversity law actually do? And the answer is it's complicated. The law is broad and creates a lot of uncertainty. There are parts of it that are deeply concerning. One of the biggest risks we're seeing right now isn't just what the legislature passed, but what folks assume the law restricts. So today we're talking about what the law actually says, what it doesn't say, and why understanding those differences is important for every community in Florida. I'm John Harris Maurer, Public Policy Director and General Counsel for Equality Florida, and joining me is my colleague, Quinn Diaz, our Public Policy Manager. Quinn and I have spent this legislative session deep in the details of this bill, and we've been working with local governments, attorneys, and community leaders to prepare for the law's January 1st effective date.
Thanks, John Harris. I'm really glad that we're having this conversation today because we've been answering versions of the same question almost every day since the legislative session ended. People want to know, can cities still recognize pride? Can they still partner with nonprofits? Do advisory boards have to disappear? And can elected officials still attend community events? Underneath all of those questions is a bigger one. What does the law actually require? And that's what we're here to unpack today.
So before we dive into specifics, it's worth acknowledging something up front. This law is concerning. It creates new restrictions on counties and municipalities and uncertainty for local governments trying to serve their unique communities. None of that should be minimized. But it's also important to remember that the bill that became law is not the same as the bill that was originally introduced. There were 2 years of strong advocacy. Local officials spoke up, community members testified, and organizations across Florida raised their concerns. The final bill contains a number of protections that simply weren't there when it was first introduced 2 years ago, or even at the beginning of this most recent legislative session.
Yeah, and that matters because implementations start with the law that actually passed, not the version that people remember from committee hearings or headlines that happened months ago. And there were meaningful changes. For example, the final law protects the Pulse Memorial. It preserves advisory boards. It protects certain cultural and historical recognition activities. It preserves local government's ability to tailor health programs to higher need communities and to issue permits for community events like Pride. Those are significant changes, and they matter because local governments still have authority in areas where earlier drafts of the bills would have gone much further.
This law will change things, but it doesn't eliminate local government's ability to govern. The challenge now is figuring out where those new boundaries actually are. So let's start with some of the most basic questions. If someone asked you at a community meeting, what does the law do? Quinn, what would you say to that?
Yeah, so I would probably say that at its core, this law does restrict counties and municipalities from funding, promoting, or taking certain official action related to what it defines as diversity, equity, and inclusion. The challenge is that the statute defines diversity, equity, and inclusion in a very broad way. It references race, color, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity. It also uses terms like preferential treatment, special benefits, and designed or implemented with reference to. Some of those terms just aren't defined. So local governments are trying to interpret a law that leaves some very important questions unanswered.
And that uncertainty matters because this isn't just about changing official names or offices or redoing organizational charts. The law affects policies, programs, contracts, grant agreements, and employee training. It creates a new compliance framework for counties and municipalities that has significant enforcement risks.
Yeah, it creates a new private right of action, meaning that residents can sue their county or municipality over alleged violations, and it creates potential consequences for local officials who are acting in their official governmental capacity if they violate the law, including the removal of office, potentially. So it would also eliminate DEI offices and require certain contractors and grant recipients to certify that local government funds won't be used for activities that are prohibited by the law or for required training for their employees. And those are real changes that deserve careful attention.
Things that I've noticed in conversations is that people often assume uncertainty means something is prohibited. If something isn't crystal clear in the law, they think the answer must be no, it's not allowed. But Quinn, why do you think we're seeing that?
Yeah, well, I think it's understandable because uncertainty makes people nervous, right? If you're a city attorney, a department director, a city manager, an elected official, the instinct is often to avoid risk. That's understandable. Nobody wants to expose their local government to litigation or face removal from office. But the important distinction here is that being cautious isn't the same as assuming everything is banned by the law.
So we've started using the term overcompliance. Can you walk us through what overcompliance means?
Yeah, so when we talk about overcompliance, we mean a local government is stopping to do something not because the law requires it, but because they assume it might, or they're too scared to really purse the details. So maybe a city dissolves an advisory board without checking whether it's actually covered, or maybe it ends a nonprofit partnership or rescinds already allocated funding simply because that organization serves LGBTQ residents. Maybe it stops recognizing a longstanding cultural observation without first asking whether the law actually requires that change. Those decisions have real local consequences, and they aren't always necessary legally.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions we're trying to address. Our guidance has been read the law carefully, implement it faithfully, but don't surrender authority to the legislature that it never took away in the first place.
Exactly. Faithful compliance means understanding the whole statute, the restrictions and the exceptions, the prohibitions and the authority that remains. If we're only talking about what the law prohibits, then we're not telling a complete story, and we risk losing some of the progress that communities have worked so long to realize.